position, party politics, political studies, comparative European politics and society. And he is a co-editor of Political Populism, Handbook on Concepts, Questions and Strategies of Research in 2021, Sovereignism and Populism for Routledge in 2021. He is also the principal investigator of a 4-year international project on populism and conspiracy funded by the national research agencies of Switzerland and Austria. And this is also the reason why we invited Oscar, because we are working also here at the Sant'Anna School with the STARS and Goldstein's project, European Jean Monnet module on the political uses of conspiracy theories. And he also co-editor of Populism and Key Concepts in Social and Political Theory with Carlos de la Torre, just published in 2023 by Brill. And this lecture, so the title is Thinking the Relation Between Populism and Conspiracy in Political Sciences, a Conceptual Approach. And after the lecture, we obviously have the possibility to discuss with the Professor Mazzoleni on this paper. So thank you very much. Thank you, Oscar, to be here. We are really, it's really a pleasure for us, please.
So thank you very much. Thank you very much to Giuseppe Martinico and Marco Solinas for this wonderful invitation. It's a very pleasure for me to be here. It's the first time at Sant'Anna, and I have to. My premise is probably a disappointment for some people, because my presentation is not on empirical dimensions, not empirical outputs, not methodological dimensions, but on conceptual dimensions. This presentation is related to a question that for me lacks for answers nowadays in the so-called populist scholarship, especially in political science. And the question is very, very simple. We have some personalities, some leaders, and some parties that usually are called or labeled as populist. But the problem is, are really populist this man or woman? So the question is, for example, Donald Trump, is this man a Republican, a populist, a conspirator, a wannabe fascist, maybe? And the answers by scholars is, as a soccer fan teams, and the idea is you choose one do you prefer, depending of your discipline, depending of your approach, and then you exclude the rest. You exclude the alternative labels. But why? It's just a question of fun. It's just a question of personal decision. But the problem is really to understand why and how this man could be both Republican, populist, conspirator, and some other concept at the same time, simultaneously. The problem is exactly that. So the challenge that I try to raise today is to connect, to understand how we can connect concept as populism with related concept as conspirational theories. And this question is more general. It's not just an empirical question, a pragmatic question, a methodological question, but it's a conceptual problem. So my concern is about the limits of two main current answers to this question about how you can label, how you can define these parties. So the first dominant solution is a very empiricist, and the second is based on essentialism. So the first is the essentialist, is the idea that you label as a scholar a party or a leader as populist before theoretically defining what the concept of populism is or means. This means that you can define this, you can label this leader as a Trump, as a populist. But what's the definition behind the label of populism? Is the idea of that the people or observers or whatever, journalists or scholars, they usually use this term. So this is considered enough in order to use this concept or this notion, such as conventionalism, my opinion, tend to transform into an essentialism. So the idea that is taken for granted without discussion, without theoretical discussion, that this leader is populist, constraining and limiting the possibility of understanding how populism combine with the other concept, or how you can combine this label, the use of this label, with other concept in order to understand the complexity of the message and or the political success of the party and the leader. So the point is really the success of Trump connected with a so-called populism alone, or maybe you have to combine with other dimensions, because he's also a Republican, and maybe it's important to know that he's probably a conspirator, he's probably a wannabe fascist, and it also can explain partially the success. So the point is, why do we use this label? Just for polemic reasons? Just because we are defenders of democracy against the bad people? The problem is also normative. And the problem of the essentialism is also the static consequences, because today is a populist, yesterday was populist, tomorrow is populist. So the point is, essentialism is based on a take it for granted, definitive label to these parties and leaders. And of course, that means that the other one, the opponent, are not populist, but we don't know exactly why. Maybe because we consider them Democrats, not authoritarians, or whatever. We don't know. This is, if you look at the literature, especially in political science, there is some reviews trying to show how the notion of populism is used in the literature. And in 80%, there is a recent paper on that, 80% of the large majority of the use of the notion of populism is taken for granted, just for selection, just for classifying, and not for discussing why we use this term or notion in order to select, to classify, to label the party. So you just say, this is a populist party, and this is taken for granted. So that is a very important and dominant trend. The other trend, relevant trend, is the so-called approach linking thin and host ideologies. Of course, this means that we have some populism is a kind of thin, flexible, whatever ideology, and there is strong ideology connected with it. But there is some shortcomings with that, because we don't know exactly what it means connected. What is connected? Connected is intervene, is articulated, but what it means articulated from a conceptual point of view? Is a pragmatic choice? We don't know exactly. No answer. We combine, but what it means combine? Another point is the host ideology endogenous or exogenous to populism? So within populism, there are some elements of the host ideology or the contrary. We don't know. And the point, the main problem is the fact that Frieden, Michael Frieden, who developed this distinction between thin and host ideologies, argued that populism is not a thin ideology at all. And the point is, in the literature on populism, we connect with the so-called host ideology. For instance, nationalism. But for freedom, nationalism is perfectly a case of thin ideology. So the contrary. So all these shortcomings and inconsistencies are connected with, from a conceptual point of view, with this use. So we can continue to reproduce this inconsistency or no answers to this, but of course, this means that we have also some consequences because we don't know exactly what it means. Nativism and populism. What is nativism? What's the limit? What's the threshold? What's the combination? What's the, how would they combine? We don't know. Just we combine them. Why? How? We don't know. So the problem is this linkage is exactly, is very crucial, exactly because we don't know exactly to what extent Trump is populist, nationalist, fascist, Republican. We don't know. What's the limit? What's the threshold? What is the perimeter of these concepts? We don't know. No answer. Pragmatic answer. So I'm a Democrat. I'm a militant of Democratic Party. Yes, I can say this is a fascist, of course. But as a scholar, we have to do the same. Maybe yes, maybe no, but it's a question. So the point is the question of the linkage between complex concepts of the same semantic area. In this case, could be nativism, could be nationalism, not necessarily exclusive and excluding. So populism and nationalism, there is a debate about the linkage, about the fact nationalism is not necessarily populism and vice versa. There is different solutions, but we have a few discussion about populism and authoritarianism. We put together, but without discussion. Look at the book by Norris and Hingelard. Take it for granted. Populism and authoritarianism, 1 page. But it's interesting, but it's not enough maybe to connect populism and authoritarianism. And the same for conspirationalism, because this is a new combination, new connection. But this is also express our, in my opinion, unsatisfaction of just pragmatic empiricist or normative-oriented solution. We need, in my opinion, to reconsider more seriously a conceptual-oriented approach. And this means also to moving behind classical view in terms of concept formation, which is a long debate on concept formation, at the same time, a very poor debate in concept formation. So it seems, in political science especially, a boring debate, but it's very crucial. It's very crucial because we have to, we use concept to define, to classify, to analyze reality. The first concept should be why we use this concept, where this concept come from somewhere, and we have to consider the importance, the relevance of this concept as such. So concept helps to elaborate abstract model of thought. They are symbolic intermediaries between mind and the objective world. They are basic unity of thought, helping to define reality, classify it, analyze it, and of course, enabling consistent development of theoretical and analytical approaches. There's a very, very, very large extent, broad extent of relevance of this concept. But these concepts are also part of ordinary language. That's the point. Often we use this concept as in a scientific way, adopting the same words that in ordinary language. Of course, as populism, conspirationalism, nationalism, and this is a crucial issue, in my opinion, especially if we want to consider the relation between analytical and normative challenges. But the point is, of course, the question of concept formation in political science is, as I said before, a long debate, starting in the 60s, 70s. I will mention the principal actors in political science in this field. But it's important to say concepts are integral part of the society and politics in which they emerge, it's often difficult to disentangling analytical and normative goals. Populism is an example, because it's usually used for stigmatize or banalize, normalize behavior or messages. They are not isolated, but somewhat connected to other concepts. It's difficult to distinguish clearly what's the border populism in respect. It's an artificial border. It's based on what, this border between populism and other concepts. And the point is, this isolation enough to understand the object, the reality, the phenomenon that you want to explain? So the concepts are formed by constituent elements. That's one of the common element or common ground of the discussion of concept formation. They are not just concepts. The concepts are formed by components, but property necessary and sufficient. And they are also, in social and political sciences, confronted by this tension between universality of the use and the adaptation to concrete cases. And of course, in comparative politics, very, very important. So this tension between the two elements, but populism in general, populism specific, nationalism, liberalism, every concept has this tension between this aspect. And of course, if you look at this political science, not plural, but the singular, the main influence, the main legacy, the most important author in this subfield concept formation is, of course, Giovanni Sartori. Giovanni Sartori, who is the most influential scholar, and he tried in this publication to fix some crucial element who are at the moment nowadays still very relevant. So for him, we need an equivocal association between words and conceptual goals. The golden rule is to have one word for each meaning. This is precise, one word for each meaning. And he said that we need to overcome, to fix any conceptual confusion. Confusion might arise if you have several words for one concept or one word with various meanings. And these criteria are very relevant, especially when we try to identify what Sartori considered very crucial, a minimal and universal-oriented concept and this is the very crucial point. For a concept in political science, we need universal, valuable concept. We need a minimal definition. So in order to travel across cases, across countries, in order to really allow to understand the reality and allow comparison. So we need a generic and an abstract with a minimal definition. Otherwise, the concept is confused. And the also point is very important. We need to have a consensus about this concept within the discipline. So this is crucial. So concepts are not in political science need not to have only one meaning for one concept, and this meaning should be minimal, and in order to travel everywhere. And this is very important for Sartori to possess, for scientific concept to possess a clear boundaries and defining properties they are sharing by all members that this concept refer. All members means all cases. Concepts are formed by necessary and sufficient conditions that this all constitutive dimension, because the idea this concept is composed by different dimensions, must be simultaneously present. Give an example. If you define democracy as a with some components, for instance, free elections, for instance, freedom of speech, for instance, a stable system of citizenship in order to have a body of constituency. You need to use this definition, and this definition should be applied to all the cases. So this means that if you have a democracy without one of these components, this is not a democracy. So the idea is democracy exists only through these dimensions. And if you have one element excluded on the reality or not present in the reality, this is not a democracy at all. So democracy or not democracy, there is no in between. This is the legacy of Sartori is in this sense is every constituent dimension of a concept is considered necessary, and the lack of each of them results in absence of related phenomena. You define populism in a one sense in three components. For instance, in the minimal definition by Casmude, there is some element. If one of these elements is lacking in a case, this is not populism. And of course, this minimal definition should be shared by others. If you, for instance, Casmude, one of the most important scholars in political science regarding populism, said leadership, the relation with the leaders is not important. So that means that if you are a strong leader at stake in a single case, in a single case study, this is not care, is not included is not a problem in terms of populism. So you can have plenty of other dimensions, and at the same time a strong leader. That doesn't count in this definition. So that's important to say that a minimal definition is a shared definition, and without this sharing meaning and component, of course, that means that you are not a good concept. A conceptual stretching occurs when a concept doesn't fit to some cases. So the idea that there is finally, if you have, for instance, in the 70s, especially for scholars working in Latin America, the concept of revolution was connected with the concept of violence. One of the constituent elements of revolution was violence. Then you move in the 90s in Europe, Eastern Europe, there is a revolution without violence. And the problem was, okay, but finally, is this a revolution or not? So if you take the concept, minimal concept, the definition of the concept within revolution, so what happens in Europe, in Eastern Europe in the 90s, was not revolution. So the problem is the problem of the traveling of this concept. So you can, to what extent you extend the number of dimensions and the variation of this dimension in order to consider this concept valuable? The problem is the violence. And these cases, and also the cases of democracy, for instance, push some scholars, including people work with Sartori, to move away from this binary conceptualization. So there is maybe cases where you are in between. They are a bit democrat system, but not completely democrat, but not completely anti-democrat, not completely undemocrat. There are gray zones. Maybe there are authoritarian democracy, there are electoral democracies. So there are many in-between cases. You can be in these in-between cases. You have also the problem of the reality. So the reality, do you speak about democracy in general, or do you speak about democracies in specific? And the problem, the more you develop democratization in the world, especially from the 80s and 90s, the more you discover the diversity and the difficulty to have just a minimal definition with some specific component, and then you need to adapt. And then you stretch, and then democracy, everything or nothing. Populism is the same. You start with some cases, and then there is populism everywhere. So is really populism a concept, or just a word using for everything and finally for nothing? And the problem is, for the Sartorian approach, populism is no more a valuable concept or useful concept. Why? Because there is not a sharing definition within the scholarship, so the community and academic scholarship, but also difficult to define what is the core dimension, what is the minimal definition, because there is everywhere in Latin America, this is very different tradition and the way by which populist movement, parties and leaders occur than in Europe or North America. There is a large diversity, growing diversity, and then, so finally, populism, everything. So large, so broad. So the problem is ordinary usages of concept are not always governed by a strict membership rule. So each constitutional property is present in each case. Many concepts in political science are based to open set of conditions, not necessary and sufficient condition, different definition of democracy, different cases, different particularities of democracy depending of the tradition, the history, etc. And the point is that many concepts in political science do not carry static and controversial semantic core. Semantic core. What's the core of populism? Is the centrality of people, but also in democracy, there is a centrality of people. What's the final? Is the Manichaean opposition between the people of the elite? Yes, maybe, but the people and the elite, the establishment, whatever exactly? Maybe yes, maybe not. It's not completely clear. The plasticity of the language is the problem, or the elasticity of the language, of the ordinary language that we use to describe things is unavoidable. The problem is we have always to work and use term charged, normatively charged, with plenty of connotation and contradictory connotation. That's the problem. And this is the reason, because linguistic philosophy, cognitive science, political scientists as Collier, Mahon, and other sociologists as Ragin have tried to cope with the limits of the classic conceptualization by Sartori and his Aristotelian legacy. In the Aristotelian legacy, there is a logic that this battle is a battle or nothing other. But this could be a battle, but also water. Is it water or is it a battle? There's a question. Is it simultaneously water or a battle? And the question is, can you really, to understand Trump, just a populist or maybe other at the same time, simultaneously? It's a question of logic. And there are a debate about what are the essential controversial concepts. So a philosopher, Walter Bryce Gully, in 1966, wrote a paper, important paper, and then mentioned and discussed by political scientists later, and saying that some concepts in political science inevitably involve endless disputes about their proper uses. Controversial concepts are multidimensional, that is internally complex and normatively charged. And he gave examples as art, religion, science, democracy, social justice, power, law, leadership. This is just an examples of the difficulties to find a common consensual definition of this such as concept in political social science. You cannot just fix this problem. You have to you are faced this controversial concept, essential or inherent controversial concept, and then you have to deal with democracy. what is the place, weight, importance of the rule of law in respect the power of the people? Just a question of in constitutional debate. What is its importance? What's the limit? What's the balance of this? You open the discussion. You open the discussion. You are not definitive fixed answers. It depends of what Max Weber said. Probably the fact that in our society we have contradictory and polarized values across people. But the point is, this kind of difficulties, of this kind of controversial concept, exist and we have to deal with. And it is exactly a crucial point. It's not just a shortcoming or contingent shortcoming in the debate on populism. Probably is itself is an essential controversial concept, and we have to deal with this, and not just to avoid the fact that unfortunately we have no consensus. And the other complementary debate in cognitive sciences is the concept of polysemic. Polysemic concept. There is a strong debate in this discipline, cognitive science. Is the fact that these concepts are controversial because polysemic. They have conflicting, they include different and conflicting interpretation, definition of them. Homonymy, ambiguity, vagueness. Polysemy represents subject of a large set of contemporary linguistic research, and we cannot just avoid this debate because it's not part of our discipline. Very easy, but probably not enough. And this kind of challenges could be, maybe, deal with some complementary, partially alternative perspective. And I give you here some proposal or element of reflection. The first is a conceptual, the contribution of the conceptual history. The conceptual history is the Begriffsgeschichte is based on strong, important works, especially by the main representative is Koselleck, is an historian, of course, German historian. He created a new way to understand history, and especially the evolution of conceptualization of concept over history and across space. So the idea there is a changing semantic of the concept, and this is part of the reality. And this reality is part of also of the work by scholarship. So the contribution by Koselleck was on democracy, on politics, on many other concepts, and showing how these meanings are historically contingent and embedded in different set of cultural values and practices, and how this definition meanings are contextual sensitive. And this is a strong, important contribution, of course, in an interpretative way. This is one possible way to consider the fact, for instance, that populism or democracy are concepts based on a specific and contextual way. We cannot just easily compare with some specific definitions and component democracy everywhere and in each context, in each time. Do we need to compare democracy today and democracy 20 years ago, 30 years ago, with the same meanings, with the same concept, with the same component? And can we really compare immediately the democracy in India, in Argentina, and in Italy with the same component? Is a question, of course. The second possibility to overcome this problem of the gray zone, to deal with this concept, a controversial concept, is the proposal by Ludwig Wittgenstein, the philosopher, who introduced this idea that the family resemblance. So the idea that concepts are constituted by a set of alternatives, substitutable. So the idea that these dimensions, which characterize a concept, are not just necessary and sufficient, but there is other way to substance the concept, to create, to characterize the concept. So there is alternative, homonymy to define a democracy. And this is the idea of family resemblance. So there are a kind of the idea that we have to deal with different democracies, and maybe this democracy shares some elements, but these elements are not the same, have not the same meaning. They can be different. They can variation. There is a variation of component, and they are not all components are sufficient and necessary. They are not at the same time simultaneously present in each case. Maybe there is variation. And there is important scholars in political science, Scuola and Levitsky. They adopted this approach in order to understand contemporary democracy, and especially when they argue that we need not to talk about democracy itself, but on democracy with the adjectives, as I said before, authoritarian democracy, electoral democracy, liberal democracy, etc., etc. Not democracy as such, as an essential and atemporal concept. And other possible solution. One of the most important scholar in political science, in methodology and quantitative oriented, Ragin, he wrote an important contribution on fuzzy logic in the 2000s. And fuzzy logic theory is based on mathematics and logic reflection, which was clearly based on the opposition on the Aristotelian legacy, logic binary, populist or not populist. Just that. See, this binary logic is challenged by the fuzzy logic. The fuzzy logic is possible to consider a given property not an exclusively belonging to a single concept, but share, overlapped with other concepts. So you can imagine, to some degrees, that two distinct concepts share some components. For instance, populism and nationalism. They share probably this idea of a people based on commonality in terms of nation belonging. Because the idea, some definition of populism based on the idea of populist homogeneity, people homogeneity. But what's the meaning of popular homogeneity? In nowadays, in our democracy, in our nation states, is based usually on the idea that we are one nation, one people. Of course, one nation, one people. What's the border between populism and nationalism? Yeah, there is some overlapping component. In the fuzzy logic allows to think about this possibility, to consider that populism, nationalism, conspiracy, maybe also fascism, share some component, but they are not overlapping as a concept, but some element that characterize these concepts, that are constitutive of this concept, can be shared by other concepts. So it's the fuzzy set theory. Another solution, possible solution, is the radial logic or prototype theory. Cognitive linguistics try to develop this idea that there is a kind of, when you talk about one idea, it could be a table. A table, we have a generic, when you talk about table, we think in abstract idea, what is a table in general. But then when you talk about this table, we talk about wood, we talk about the dimension. So there is a generic word, and then a peripheral specific element characterizing this word. There is a generic definition of democracy, but then we have different component, more specific. And this is the idea of the radial logic, and connected with the radial logic, there's a prototype theory, because there is idea that there is a core semantic common element. For instance, maybe all populist definitions share the idea of the people. For instance, there is a centrality of the people. Maybe it's taken for granted, but question of course, that means that you have then more specific categories able to understand that fact that not all populism has the same characteristics. Maybe, and this is this point very important, not all populists explicitly mention the centrality of the people. Maybe because they talk about citizens, individuals, freedom, Heartland, whatever. So the point is, to what's the prototype? What's the core definition? It's the problem of essential, controversial concept, of course, and the polysemic one. But this is a possibility to develop. And the other solution is, as I said before, is the diminished subtypes, especially when we have multidimensional concept. Multidimensional concept means that you have many aspects characterized depending on the context, this concept, a specific concept. As I said before, populism, when you talk about strategy, you talk about communication, we talk about ideology, we talk about leader. All these dimensions could be important or not, maybe. But nowadays, we have a lot of research, a lot of empirical research that's showing that all these dimensions exist to some extent. You can test the existence of these elements. So you can say, oh, this research is not my stuff. But in reality, we have a lot of empirical evidence showing there are many dimensions at stake. If constituent dimensions are not dichotomous, so this idea that there is yes or no, cases may lie somewhere in between full presence and full absence in any specific dimension. Situated in gray zone of one constitutive dimension, these cases are still recognizable members of a general class of phenomena. This is connected with family resemblance. So we have some elements, but not completely. So it's a democracy, but not completely. It's a populism, maybe not completely. But what means not completely? What it means not completely? The point is we need another logic just to be binary in order to grasp from a theoretical conceptual point of view this kind of in-between. And when you talk about clientelistic democracies, illiberal democracy and other, this gives you your example that fact you cannot just erase the term of democracy. Point is this. You're not just say, oh, it's an authoritarian system. No, because there are some elements that claim for the use of democracy. The same for Trump. Maybe you can just say now is a wannabe fascist. We can say it's just a far-right leader, but maybe some element of populism could be important to consider. And another possible solution is the approach of the ideal type. For instance, using the last book translated in Italian by Arato and Cohen on populism and civil society, these authors used this approach of ideal type. So they offer a list of dimensions of the concept of populism. In this sense, they offer an abstraction of understanding social phenomena, political phenomena, while acknowledging that real-world cases may not perfectly match with this ideal. So the idea, they list some dimensions, but at the same time, when they have to work on specific cases, they say, okay, maybe some elements are lacking, are present, are other yes, other no. This approach allows to define more property of concepts which are neither sufficient and necessary. The question is to what extent discourses of political actors, for instance, share the ideal type characteristic of the concept. For instance, discourses, messages, behavior, etc. So the idea is to really distinguish clearly what is the abstract ideal and the reality. It's another complementary approach. So there are many answers offered by the literature, different disciplines, in order to overcome the problem of the binary uses of populism. In my opinion, this not classic or alternative approaches suggest to consider this criteria. The problem of the endogenous or exogenous. A concept include, at least partially, other one or are perfectly distinct. The coordination and subordination. Nativism and populism, for instance, are at the same level, or national populism is a specific form of populism. The center and the periphery, is there a core meaning or not in defining the concept that we use? So this is, of course, a way by which, in my opinion, we need to work, to reflect, if we want to relate populism and conspiracy. It's a long, a long trip, I understand, but I think it's necessary for some reasons. For instance, first of all, there is two distinct research traditions in the social and political science. Populism is primarily political science and sociology. Conspiracy is primarily social psychology. And of course, other discipline now more and more, but the stronger discipline is social psychology, especially from the 70s, 80s already. They used the concept of conspiracy in an analytical, of course, way, not just polemic, the polemic use. And populism has different definitions, different way to grasp ideology, discourse, style, organization, regime, etc. Conspiracy, the same, different definition, different components. They are both are strongly polysemic concept, with strong normative connotation, and of course, doubts. There is doubt about in different disciplines about the utility and the capacity, the heuristic capacity of this concept to understand our political evolution and development. And all this, so populism and conspiracy theories are too strong concept and too complex concept. It's not easy to combine them. Is the reason because I try to propose you a reflection behind this. And I give you here very modestly an example to combine. I give you an example to combine, of course, not in empirical way, but just for, I'll give you an example. If you look at the populism, I need a typical discursive frame. So there is the possibility to define some element of this definition, ideal type definition. People in the in group, victimized, trapped in the sovereignty. The elite and other groups, outgroup, are responsible, are threat for the people, and we need for the restoration. We need a restoration of the people's sovereignty. This is just an example, of course, inspired by some scholars of a definition. And then we give here an example of a discursive ideal type outgroup within a radial logic. So there is the enemies, the outgroups. There is a vertical and horizontal dimension. And then I give you an example here. So there is in this a center, the enemies, and then the periphery of meanings. And you can imagine to define this radial logic in this way. With the big capital, of course, there is maybe a definition of populism connected with the left wing. Here can have a connection with another concept. Globalization, the establishment, and then you can be more specific, step by step. You can define the globalization, Soros, other enemies, more specific enemies. You are the generic, the enemies, the table, in general, and then this table, wood, so could be the big capital, the enemy, etc. So the logic of the radial allow to include different component, but not necessary component. Could be big capital, but could be not big capital. It depends on the case that you study. In this sense, there is a specific element. So what I say here, so the elite and other outgroup are responsible threat to the people. And here you define, so I define, of course, a vertical dimension, a horizontal dimension. There is immigrants, could be here, immigrant could be also Islam, immigrant could be specific case or a group of immigrants. In this sense, this is the idea of the center and the periphery. But the periphery is not constituent of the concept. It's a way by which the concept expresses. It's not necessary to have the concept of enemies, but as part of it. Conspiracy theories. Here we have a lot of, give you some examples of the variation, the differences, the variation of, and the debate around the definition conspiracy theories can be. So there are, first, Douglas, she's a social psychologist. There are some political scientists, but there are some, it is important not here to insist on this variation of the differences across definitions, but it's interesting to show there are some overlapping components. So the overlapping component that I mentioned before, there are populism and conspiracy are not just two concepts, separate concepts, but could be, to some extent, depending on the definition that we have of populism and conspiracy. Of course, we have to select these definitions and try to identify some overlapping component. For instance, the fact that citizens, the people, are threatened or rendered powerless. Simplistic and Manichaean view of society that can help create the group image and the enemy and establish the in-group identity. Enemies are outgroup as a responsibility of people's illness, and the claiming for alternative status quo, so restoring the sovereignty, restoring the truth, etc. So there are some we could identify, and according to the logic, the fuzzy set logic, we can have this kind of scheme. So the fuzzy set logic means that we have some commonality, some component shared, and some component not shared. For instance, here, populism and conspiracy are two concepts, but at the same time, they share some component. The anti-establishment claim, the betrayed citizen, the claiming for radical change. But at the same time, populism and conspiracy are not the same. Some of the components can be, on the one side, the truth, because conspiracy is, the point is not to restore the sovereignty, but the truth, the alternative truth, the idea that there are some misunderstandings, some manipulations, and the people, we need to restore truth. And the other side, we have sovereignty on populism and the nation. So this is kind of how we can combine concretely, and of course we can analyze that in different ways. We have a project in Lausanne and Salzburg, and one of the main research question is to analyze how our radical right parties in Europe can use discourses, of course, adopt discourses in which you can include populist and conspirational dimensions. And of course, we can imagine to develop a code scheme, from an analytical point of view, a code scheme, in order to show how this common element could be erased, could be are present or not in the discourses. So some aspects are specific to populism, some other are specific to conspirationalism, but there are some common elements. Some conclusions. Scholars in political science are often prisoners of a binary logic. Donald Trump could be Republican, must be Republican or populist or conspirator or wannabe fascist. Here, what I propose is to put not or, but and. Of course, and just means that we can have 100% what means Republican, 100% populist, etc., etc. No, is to combine them, looking at the overlapping component This is a complex configuration, but our task is to understand reality, especially why and how these kind of politicians are successful. Beyond binary logic, there are different perspectives provided by conceptual history, radial concept, fuzzy set logic, ideal types approaches. The advantage of this approach is also to avoid the limit of anti-theoretical empiricism and as essentialist labeling, which are widespread in populist research and strongly connected with normative goals. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Oscar, for this really interesting lecture with so many insights, also especially at theoretical level. And I'm sure that there are some points, questions